So if you didn't grow up with rich parents, figuring out how to think about money is actually really hard. We also think that if we didn't grow up around money, then we've actually got no hope to change our financial future. But nothing could be further from the truth. Most people believe that the best they can do to get good with money is to learn a few tips. Well, in today's video, I want to share something with you that I think will give you an edge and accelerate how you win around money. Specifically, 10 psychological filters that you can adopt that will help you think like someone who's great with money. After 25 years of helping people build wealth across all kinds of income levels, I noticed something. The people who succeed with money don't just do things differently, they think differently, they see the world differently. And I've learned the hard way that money success is as much about how you see the world as what you do. And over a long time, I've started to collect these and share them with others. In some cases, they can make a huge difference. I started to call these ideas filters. Bottom line, if you can learn how to adopt these filters, you can give yourself an edge that you might otherwise only get if you were raised in a rich household, which I wasn't. So filters are the lens you look through when making decisions. So imagine putting on a pair of glasses that really changes the way you see things. Well, that's what my psych filters are all about. They shape what you notice, what you ignore, and how you act. And they help you sort through noise and focus on what matters. So most people don't even know filters exist, so they keep making the same mistakes. Let me give you a quick example. Years ago, I worked with two people who earned about the same level of income. They were both super smart, hardworking. One spent years jumping around from idea to idea. The other built a $2 million portfolio in under 10 years, super quietly. And the difference was they weren't playing a different game. One just saw it more clearly. So this isn't theory. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner, showed that most people use shortcuts when making choices, and those shortcuts save time but can lead to poor decisions. Wealthy people pause, they think, they don't just react, and that's their edge. They don't just avoid mistakes, they avoid the big ones. So let's get into it. So when we think about these 10 filters, what we want to think about is a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum is one set of behaviors, and at the other end of the spectrum is a completely opposite set of behaviors. So let's work through these. The first one that I want to talk about is this idea of being biased versus agnostic. So when you are really biased, it means you have preconceived ideas about something. Maybe your ideas on certain investments or the way that money should be spent comes from something your parents said, something your friend said, something you heard on the TV, but it's not based in reality or experience. At the other end of the spectrum is this idea of being agnostic. Agnostic means you're open to learning. You don't have preconceived ideas. You work really hard not to become dogmatic about the way things work. You are open to learning, and for example, on the investing front, you're open to learning and understanding new ideas about how an investment works. The next one is apathetic to fierce. So the reality is, if you don't care about money, if you don't care about becoming wealthy, it's really, really hard to actually develop any meaningful kind of relationship with money. At the other end of the spectrum is what I call fierce. Now, fierce doesn't mean you have to go around bragging or being loud and vocal about it, but it means you have a level of determination and you are fierce about the actions and the urgency that you bring to your relationship with money. So that is another spectrum or a psychological filter that's super powerful. The next one is the person who compares versus the person who is blinkered. It's really easy to get caught in the trap of looking at what everybody else has instead of actually putting on the blinkers and just running your own race. The reality is we all think differently, we have different risk appetites, so it makes no sense to think about what you're achieving in comparison with anyone else. And so the filter that we want to adopt is, how can we be more blinkered? How can we really kind of set our sights on what we want and drown out the rest of the noise? The next one is those who suffer from paralysis versus minimum viable information, and I call that roughing it. So there are a lot of people out there who agonize about, do I know enough, before they take any action. A lot of professions really cultivate this. So for example, engineers and very mathematical people can often stop themselves from making decisions about money because they're waiting for more information. So instead of being paralyzed by this idea of not knowing enough. What we want to do is concentrate on this filter called minimum viable information. Do I have enough information to make a reasonably informed decision? So roughing it. So it's not always the case, but generally speaking, you want to be able to make decisions by roughing it, meaning that you get the right amount of information and you just pull the trigger and make decisions. The next one is scattered at one end versus focused at the other. So the metaphor here is if you think about an old stereo which has like a dial on it, there are so many people wasting time kind of doing things that don't make any difference. They don't actually move them forward. And that could be about skills that they learn, ideas that they consume that make very little difference. They might be interesting, but they don't make any difference. So when you're thinking about how am I going to spend my time getting a deeper understanding around money, instead of being really scattered about it, what you want to do is you want to be really focused. And coming back to the metaphor of the hi-fi system, you want to focus on any actions or activities that move the needle of the stereo. Otherwise, if it doesn't move the needle, you put it in the, would be nice basket. But concentrate your efforts on actions and thoughts and behaviors that will move the needle. The next one is herd thinking versus own ideas. So this is a really important one. It's really easy in the world of social media to really look at what is everybody else thinking about a certain topic. I know for the first 10 years of my own journey around trying to understand money and build my own wealth, that I was always looking at, well, what does everyone else think about a subject? 10 years into my journey, I realized I did not have the results that I wanted or that I had expected, and that the only way for me to start kind of breaking away from the herd was to actually shift my thinking. So instead of herd thinking, which is I'll just do the same things that everybody else does, instead I started to look for people who had the results I wanted, and I started to cultivate my own ideas. Now that's a difficult one, but it's certainly one to psychologically aspire to. The next one is shifting from being a consumer to being an empire builder. It's really hard to take $1 out of your pocket today and think about, let me put it into some investment or asset for my future self. But the way to do that is to cultivate this filter that instead of being someone who consumes, who spends on going out, spending money, that you shift your filter to someone who is an empire builder. Because when you are an empire builder, it just doesn't hurt to take that money out of your pocket, forego some of the things that maybe you might enjoy today in order to create better freedom options tomorrow. So that one is a really important one. It's a really great filter. The next one is get rich quick versus momentum. So there are so many people out there creating content about tactics and hacks, if you like, that will create a huge amount of money in a short space of time. And, some of those are potentially valid, but what I have found is wherever I have chased those kinds of things in the past, it doesn't get me where I want to go. And if anything, I've lost money. What I have found much more meaningful is to focus on this concept of momentum. I want lower returns that I can live with over the long term that will compound and ultimately give me a much stronger foundation than if I go chasing get rich quick schemes. So the filter to cultivate here is you want to build momentum rather than have sporadic attempts at trying to put your money into get rich quick schemes. The next one is instead of being the lone wolf at one end, you want to seek to build your tribe of mentors. This is a phenomenal filter. Too many people think that they've just got to go it alone when it comes to building a great relationship with money or building wealth. And I know for the first few years of my career, I was certainly very much a lone wolf. At the other end of the spectrum is someone who very carefully chooses or finds people who have the results that they want and then build a group of mentors that they can call on or dip into as and when they need it. And so cultivating this idea that you want to look for people who, as I said, they're not 5 years into their journey and claiming that they know it all, but people who've maybe experienced a few market cycles, who have been building over the longer term, who are open to supporting and helping up, giving people a hand up. They're the people you want to align with, because ultimately in my own journey, those mentors will probably, if you think about, where were the points of inflection where I started to get big results, it was when I had the right voices and the right mentors around me. The final one is, the filter of mirroring what your mates do versus setting your own beat. This is a really, really challenging one, easier said than done. So what I mean when I say that is, instead of doing what your friends do, whether it's spending habits, how they spend their time, what they watch, how they value different things, how they value you or other people, instead of kind of tuning into that and actually trying to mirror, because we all want to fit in, I get it. At the other end of the spectrum is the person who kind of keeps the friends that they want, but actually starts to create this filter of how can I set my own beat. And some of that comes from some of those other filters that I've mentioned, but it's really this desire to not mirror, to stand away from maybe what your friends or family or people around you are doing, and actually set your own beat, your own cadence around what you do, what you think, what you watch, how you spend your money. So those are my 10 filters that, in my opinion, if you can start to cultivate, are life-changing. So if you want to win with money, I highly recommend you start here. Use better filters. Notice the ones that may be holding you back, and keep asking the question, does this move me closer to the life I want or further away? That one question might change everything.